Welcome to the Strategy at Scale podcast, brought to you by Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. Our mission is to cut through a sea of contradictory business advice and get to what actually works. We interview entrepreneurs and business builders who have successfully scaled companies across industries to extract proven, high-impact strategies to scale the value of whatever you are building in this world. Let's dive into this week's episode. Many rapidly scaled companies won through channel strategy, finding or creating a new path to the customer. Consider Dell, sold directly to consumers, bypassing traditional retailers. Salesforce delivered CRM via the cloud, avoiding on-premise installations. Apple opened its own stores, reducing its dependence on third-party retailers. Amazon created an online marketplace, disrupting physical retail. Netflix shifted from DVDs to streaming. They bypassed cable providers. Tesla sold cars directly online, skipping traditional dealerships. Your channel strategy is one of the most important set of strategic choices you will make. It may very well determine the success or failure of your enterprise. So how do you pick which channel to pursue and assess what it's going to take to win in that channel? Well, our guest, Connie Shepherd, knows. Connie Shepherd is an executive and strategist with over 35 years of experience in some of the world's leading CPG companies, including Procter & Gamble, Kellogg, Starbucks, Hershey, and Bumble Foods. Throughout her career, she has built a proven track record of successfully opening up new channels. Her insights will help us better select which channels to serve and how to win in that channel, which you're going to hear involves much more than you might think. It involves building top teams across marketing, sales, strategy, and revenue management functions. She's done this across 32 consumer product categories and 21 different distribution channels. She is known for her strategic acumen. She's able to quickly assess and translate business needs into pivotal choices that lead to sustainable growth. Most recently, as SVP of Strategy and Commercialization for Bumble Seafoods, she was responsible for managing a $1.02 billion P&L. In 3 years, that company achieved over 18 million EBITDA growth year over year. In this episode, we're going to gain insights from several of her success stories, how Connie led a complete overhaul of Bumble Foods, focusing on strategy, structure, and talent. That, by the way, is one of my favorite frameworks of hers: strategy, then structure, then talent, in that order. How she brought the Starbucks experience to retail with innovations like the signature aisle. How she turned Kellogg's smallest region into a growth driver by breaking down barriers and leading teams. How she helped test new channels through adopting rapid test and learn experiments at P&G, and how she transformed Hershey's approach by changing the key performance metrics to drive better results. Ladies and gentlemen, Connie Shepherd.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here. To start, we'd love to hear some of the stories that you went through and your experiences leading transformation and building businesses.
Yeah, and especially we thought that what you did at Bumblebee would be particularly interesting, because I know that from a ownership and leadership structure, it was a quite tumultuous situation that you stepped into. Could you just maybe start telling us about that?
Sure. Well, I think we all understand and know about tuna and tuna fish, particularly Bumblebee, and there's also Starkist, and there's Chicken of the Sea. Tuna in a can really reached its height in the late 1980s and 90s, and since has been somewhat declining. So we missed a generation. And so one of the challenges that we had was, how do we become more relevant to the current generation and package our foods in ways they want to eat the product versus the way their grandparents ate the product. And so just for a little context and background, Bumblebee had been purchased in the previous decade and a half 4 times by private equity.
Wow.
Now, remember, this is a declining category because the baby boomers were the highest consumers and they're beginning to wean off. And we being all the national brands, did not do a great job recruiting the younger generations. The younger generations think that the product, because it's center store, is processed. It's not. It's one of the healthiest proteins in the entire store. It has water, salt, and tuna. and it's packaged but not processed. And so again, we've done a poor job in communicating that you can't get 29 grams of protein for $2 anywhere in the world.
Good point. Great point.
So, one of the reasons I went to Bumblebee is, wow, affordable protein and healthy protein is something that everyone really needs. Bumblebee is a brand that still resonates. And the company's vision was to feed people's lives through the power of the ocean. So I felt like the base of the bones of the business were super strong. In addition to some of the challenges of a declining category and private equity transitions, the company also went through, I guess I could say the industry, because Chicken of the Sea and StarKist also went through this. They went through a variety of price fixing indictments by the Department of Justice. Then Bumblebee filed bankruptcy and was purchased after that by FCF, which is the world's largest fish procurement company. Oh, by the way, COVID was in the middle of that as well. So you kind of throw all these things in, and I was hired by Jan Tharp, the CEO at the time, to reinvigorate the brand and transform the commercial department. So it was a pretty big lift. And so it was not only really trying to shift strategy and bring the relevance of the brand to the forefront, but it was also an organization that hadn't invested in the infrastructure, the capabilities, and frankly, the whole organization was experiencing change fatigue. So there was a lot going on, both, you could say, hard issues and soft issues that needed to be addressed. And so one of the key things was, how do we create the case for change? I mean, why change? Well, if we kept on the current trajectory, we probably wouldn't have as strong a business as we had today. And the Bumblebee brand was being eroded. So what is the reason to believe then? And so we got together, I got a multifunctional group together, and we looked at how to drive a new strategy that really focused on our key stakeholders. Key stakeholders are the people. Why do we exist? Who are we serving? Are we trying to make, each new private equity rich, or are we truly trying to give affordable protein that tastes delicious to our consumers? And are we trying to sell and help our customers with solutions that make the experience in the store even better? And so we shifted from more of an internal focus to an external focus on, okay, we got to change because the path isn't sustainable. How are we going to change to be successful? And if we win with the consumer and our customers, then the category will grow and all boats will rise.
Right.
So we did that. We also then structured for success. And so how do you structure to support that strategy? Because, it's strategy, structure, and talent. And then
can you repeat that? Strategy, structure, and talent. Is it?
Yep. Strategy, structure, and talent. A lot of times what companies do is they fit talent into a structure because they're a good person or whatever reason, and hope that it delivers a strategy. But if you stick with strategy, structure, then people, it's always what's the right thing long term versus the short term. And so we did strategy, structure, and then we took a look at the talent. What type of skills did we need that would help drive more problem solving, elevate the conversation at the customer versus it being very transactional? How do we talk about the total store, all of seafood, and what we can bring to that? And we built a value proposition around that. What is Bumblebee doing uniquely different than competition versus saying, we do this well, competition does that bad. It's, what are we bringing to you, customer? What are the ideas worth paying for? What are the unique attributes in marketing, innovation, et cetera, that we're bringing that will enable you to be successful and deliver the right consumer experience? For example, our marketing became very targeted on purpose to millennials. With consumer research, we found out that millennials don't really eat meals the way the baby boomers and some older generations do. They do a lot of snack meals. Mm-hmm. So we declared we wanted to be the choice snack meal for millennials. Wow. So the marketing was very targeted to that for a variety of reasons. One, like I said, we hadn't been talking to the previous generations. How do we get more users? And two, how do we talk to them in such a way that it's the way they eat?
Which one clarification question for people who are listening who aren't from a consumer or CPG kind of background. You use the word customer and you use the word consumer. And those are two different things. Just could you describe what the difference?
Yeah. So the customer, what I mean by the customer is the retailer.
Yeah.
So I can shift that context. So a consumer would be somebody that eats, experiences the product.
Great.
Oftentimes the consumer is also different than the shopper, which would be the person purchasing. Well, think about dog food.
Yeah, that's true.
Or baby food. So it is important to make sure that the product delivers to not only the person consuming, using it, but also creates demand for the person buying it. And so from my Procter days, Ed Arts said there's 2 moments of truth. And it really resonated with me, and I still think about the business the same way. One is the point when the consumer experiences the product. That's the first moment of truth, right? Or the second. The first moment is the choice to pick it up off the shelf. So they can't experience unless they choose it. So how do you create demand in a plethora of products? Whether it's through marketing, whether it's through in-store experience, whether it's an omni-channel packaging, self-evident packaging. I mean, think about, even teas like hot teas that call out what the tea will do for you versus a brand name. So self-evident packaging, also packaging around different consumption occasions. Think about candy. You have a candy bar, which is immediate consumption. You have down the aisle, which is at home. And then you have seasons on top. Right. So yes, it's how do you create that demand in store? It's also been kind of overused, but the path to purchase. So that's the first moment of truth or the first choice. The second choice, which I kind of started with because I really feel like if you don't have this, you don't have a full circle and a healthy brand. And that is when the product is used, because in a bigger context, what you're talking is trial and repeat.
Yes.
So why do I want to take it off the shelf? And then my experience with the product, which could be the second moment of truth. Am I going to buy it again? So when I talk customer, I'm talking the retailer, which is that first moment of truth of why should I even pick it up? When I talk consumer, it's really that second component, and it's why I use consumer, not shopper, because is the person experiencing that product.
Yes.
And so what I found is the reason it's so critical to focus on those elements and get the strategy right based on the consumer. The customer can't argue it. It's based on data. And if you can serve the consumer in a better, different way that meets their unique needs, then you have a sustainable business model of growth forever. So, yeah. And then there was a lot of infrastructure building that we had to do. We had an antiquated trade promotion management system that didn't let us look at the business and evaluate return on investment well. There was what I would call commercial discipline of tracking the business daily, as well as talking about the business, not just in retrospect, but forward looking. Mm-hmm. Okay, we missed the first quarter. What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? What are we going to do differently next quarter as opposed to
versus? Reporting the news, right?
Yeah, right.
So the news doesn't help us necessarily unless we take actions. So, and we did invest in some talent as well as promote current talent that had the skills and wanted to adapt and adjust to the future. And what we ended up doing is, the share growth is pretty incredible. Right now, in this half of the year, we're growing share at 7 out of the top 10 customers. That was not the case, even 2 years ago. We won the Walmart advisorship, unseating StarKist after 18 years because we brought data-based solutions to the customer that was good for the category and the consumer, not just Bumblebee.
Got it.
Yeah, we've won innovation awards. We've had the top 5 innovation items in the category the last 2 years. We've won packaging awards in the pouches because not only did we picture, again, this is all the context of the consumer. Not only did we picture the deliciousness of the food on front, we had a QR code on the back that had the recipe. So it made it very simple. And we also did research and understood you don't want more than 3 ingredients. You want to stay under this price point, delivering this superior consumer experience and value.
Fascinating. So it sounds like you're talking a lot about change leadership. Is that right?
Yes, but change, it's not just about change leadership. I think it's also about a variety of other actions like leading people. Like, how do you get people to be motivated to do things they haven't done before? It's also about having fearless execution to drive results. So the results have to be tied back to the strategy, or it's just words, right? So leading change, leading people through that change, driving results, and then really building coalitions along the way. In other words, doing it so that the entire company benefits versus one function versus another function. So, what I mean by that is, heck, product supply is all driven by efficiency. They just soon have one product and produce it 24/7. Sales would have 4 million products because whatever the customer. So what is that balance to understand? Here's when we push back on one function, and here's where we ask the other function to lean in so that the entire company benefits.
I love that insight you shared about strategy, structure, and talent. But Bumblebee is not the only transformation you've been a part of. Can you share a little bit about your work at Starbucks?
Sure. Starbucks was a great experience. Let me kind of lay out the context of that so that as we talk through it, it'll resonate a bit more. I was a part of the CPG, or consumer packaged goods, part of Starbucks. Those are the Starbucks items that you buy in a grocery store. In addition, we had licensed stores. So those would be stores that you would find in a Target or in an airport. So it's everything Starbucks except the employees. Kraft had been distributing the CPG product for Starbucks. We believed that we could quadruple the business if we took it direct and had actual experts in premium coffee selling that to customers and focusing on, again, the key consumers that were consuming that. And we were also challenged to how do you bring the store experience into some of these older, stodgier channels like mass and club and drug and all of that. So in doing so, we created an organization strategy and in a structure, and then hired people who could actually do that knew how to build big brands bigger. And the interesting challenge was, as we're selling the prepackaged products in grocery stores, food, drug, mass, faster and growing, the retail stores also had take-home packages that they had objectives for. So oftentimes there was some even internal challenges around, hey, wait a minute, we've got a quota or budget and you're cannibalizing the business. So we had to do a lot of work to explain why it was a different user, why it wasn't cannibalizing, why it was complementary. The other thing is, in a Starbucks store, if I'm making it up, if you run out of egg bites, you can still substitute a muffin. In CPG, if you can't do that, you need to have 98% fill rate. So the whole supply chain concept, hey, we'll just switch to another product. You can't do that when you're supplying retailers. When I say customers, retailers, because they're demanding 98% fill rate. So we had to reteach, build new capabilities from a supply chain standpoint of why you had to forecast differently, you had to demand plan differently in order to deliver, because you're now selling through a customer versus being the retailer to the consumer. So there were some interesting challenges with that. But again, I think some of the core pieces are, one, assuming positive intent internally and seeking to understand. And then I do believe that with change and with transformation, why is critical. Once people, they can argue the what, But if you pull back the layer and understand the why, why are we doing this? Why is it not going to cannibalize the business? Why is it the right thing to do for the consumer? Then it creates that core of alignment. Well, that makes sense. And I am aligned to that. And I do agree to that, and cuts out you're trying to hurt my business or make my function more complicated. So we were able to double the business in 2 years while I was there. And again, it was strictly very focused on the right strategy, and actually built that premium segment in the coffee category in those channels. We also did some really cool things. We called it the signature aisle, and we did to the aisle in a grocery store what you would do or what it looked like in one of the retail stores. So it had a digital barista. It had kind of the wood and a lot of the design elements of a store. We then, if the retailer allowed us to do that with them, we got the end cap, and we give them a particular blend that was exclusive to them. And, people were worried about other retailers going, hey, wait a minute, they have this blend. And we'd say, you can have that blend too if you have a dedicated end cap and allow us to do the signature aisle. And so it got out of let's be fair and equitable. Interestingly enough, at the time, a lot of bulk coffee was being sold, and retailers were hesitant to get rid of it because one of the benefits of that was the smell of the coffee aroma would bring people to the aisle. So we actually adjusted and adapted and put a scent puffer in the signature aisle. So imagine turning the corner and seeing this unique blend in a Starbucks type design wrapped around the corner with a digital barista. And so again, what we found when we measured those results was people actually lingered there a bit longer, versus the, 7 point whatever seconds that they stay in front of a shelf, because it had just a different feel. And the category grew and Starbucks grew. I won't tell you how many arguments we had over the scent puffer. It went all the way to Howard Schultz, who had back at the time to decide what the scent puffer would be. But it's just amazing how, again, taking some success in the retail channel, and how do you bring that to other channels with a total sensory experience to engage in the product in a new and different way.
What I'm hearing a little bit is you're talking a little bit about the leading people, and that there you help P&G enter a new channel. You have many times in your career opened up new channels, and then there's a people component to that. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, very much so. So, one of my favorite and interesting stories about leading people was the Kellogg Western region. So basically in the Western region, it was the smallest region from a size, volume standpoint, as well as the lowest share region. But people don't eat cereal in the West differently. Part of it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or who got there first, the competition versus Kellogg. The other thing was we had some really talented leaders on the business, but they each did their own thing. And in the West, you have a lot of regional retailers or customers that you don't necessarily need to align from a national standpoint. So think of it as, a rowing team everybody was rowing at a different beat. And some of them hated each other, which was also fun. So, but it's interesting why they hated each other and how they ended up then valuing each other. So I did a couple of things. One was get those leaders in a room and break down any, false perceptions, and they were perceptions. The reason they hated each other, these two particular folks I'm thinking of, is one was highly analytical, non-emotive. The other one was very creative and emotive and all over the place. Well, they weren't disrespecting each other. They didn't understand what each other was saying. But then when we peeled back that onion to say, oh, you're not, disrespecting me. You don't even know what I'm talking about. And I'm actually filling in your blank spots. You can help me.
Really?
It totally changed the dynamic. So one was, how do we value each other and how can we help each other? The other was, I pulled the multifunctional team together with these leaders and let them decide what the core metric should be. What is the metric we should go after? Is it cases, volume? Is it gross sales? Is it net sales? Is it profit? Is it share? And the team decided, well, let me back up also a second. We did some pre-work so that people were grounded in past what we did and what we did successfully and future trends. So basically, we got a landscape. What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What do we need to prepare for? And then really started, what should we measure that will change the game? And the team decided on profitable share growth. And we picked a number. I don't think the number matters, but it was growth. And then we did the research, and what we found was people do eat cereal in the West just as much, but there were 4 markets where we were extremely underdeveloped. And what we agreed to do was go after those markets in a much more aggressive merchandising and marketing approach. So typically, you never wanted to go super low, like a buy one, get one free in cereal, because it just messes up the economics. But we did do that to drive trial in those regions. I also worked with marketing. So again, leading coalitions and across the organization said, hey, marketing, instead of a 50% coupon, maybe do $1 because you've got higher upside in these particular markets. Boom, overnight share growth, sustainable, the whole 9 yards. So one was getting everyone on the same page on what's the metric, getting a plan on a page that they designed, and then each leader had a strategic pillar in that, and then a scorecard. So you had a plan on a page, what are we doing? You had a scorecard, how are we doing? And everyone from a retail sales rep, the person that goes in the store and builds the display, to the director over a particular business, knew exactly what part they played and how they were impacting the overall business. Yes, they could see the interconnections. They could also, it wasn't Connie's plan. It wasn't the company telling us what to do. It was, hey, I want to be proud of what I do, where I go, and we can do this together. So it's very much leading people by bringing them along and letting them helping them define the solution versus telling.
We know change doesn't come easily, whether it's leading people or leading people to change, and it takes a lot of courage. Do you have any other examples that show courage in your journey?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is back at Kellogg as well. And I love to tell this to sometimes my mentees because it is a great example of when do you adapt and change? When do you stick with the idea? And then the courage to persevere, regardless of what I would call short-term pain or issues. So let me lay out the context for this as well. So Pop-Tarts, in order to grow Pop-Tarts, we invested heavily with Walmart to the point where Walmart was 45% of the Kellogg Pop-Tart business, and grocery channel wasn't growing. Neither was any of the other channels. So we looked and the economics weren't working. So we needed to cross the $2 threshold, which we knew would be painful from an elasticity standpoint. In other words, the price point would shell shock some consumers. They'd have to get used to that's the new price and then purchase it. So we needed to cross the $2 threshold, reconfigure the financials, balance the investment across channels in order to have a more sustainable growth business model for Pop-Tarts. So we did a bunch of research and we said, what's going to happen when we cross the $2 threshold? We partnered with marketing and finance and all of the different functions. We said, okay, it looks like it's going to be a bit painful. We're going to get a little less volume for a short period, but then the consumer will bounce back and realize this is the new base price. A couple of things happened. The day that we announced the price increase, marketing changed the packaging from red and white to blue. The other thing, competition entered the category. Before that, Pop-Tarts had a 65 share, and it was Pop-Tarts and private label. There was no other competition. So now you have a price increase to cross the $2 threshold. You have competition entering, which just by the sheer name brand, people would try it. And then you have, the added complexity of a change in packaging. So in addition to that, I had held out funding for incremental events throughout the year. I spent it all in Q1. So after a month, we are overspent in investment. We are losing and not hitting budget from a volume standpoint, and we are losing share. It's like the trifecta of a loser, right? So I remember going into my boss's office and he goes, it's marketing's fault, right? Because they changed the package. And so I went to marketing. I'm like, we need to stick together. We need to reground everybody on, remember we said this? It's happening. It's a little more severe because of these elements. Hold. So every week we had to go to senior leadership and reemphasize, remember we said the elasticity was this? Okay, it's happening. Remember now competition, knew this would impact the share. Remember that spending? Yes, we didn't phase it right, but we did it to combat competition. So in that conversation, it was, Connie, you've messed up our biggest brand. The president told me later that he had a price rescind letter on his desk to send out. They were going to rescind the price increase.
Wow.
But we went every week and we said, hold, it's not sustainable the other way. We all agreed. This is painful. There is unique elements, but it's not out of whack. Hold. 6 months later, competition got discontinued because they never got a foothold in the category because of that crazy spending I did. Blue Box was validated that the consumer liked that better. It was just we needed to call out the different flavors in a bigger way. Okay. Walmart's growing. Groceries growing. Connie, you are the next CEO. So I didn't screw up the biggest brand, and I'm not the next CEO.
Love it.
But it's a classic case to me of courage and leadership and leading people and leading change and leading doing the right things right, because short term, it may be a bit painful. The brand then grew for 3 years straight without any additional investment.
Amazing.
But it took 6 months. That's it. 6 months.
Yes. And it's not just you and your team's courage. It is creating courage with other internal stakeholders.
Yeah, very much so.
Love that story. One thing that I've, in preparing for this, that I've read about you and is the kind of the performance that you're able to get out of people. Like, they say Steve Jobs, they would say something like he can make you feel like, to do something that you never thought you could do. And I get a little sense that there's that in you. Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll go back to, I call it waking the sleeping giant, but really P&G, and how we were able to, we being the team, and I were able to not only show new opportunities and a path forward, but dispel some of the risk-averse behaviors and barriers, I would say, to really trying something new. So Procter is very good at what they do. They have more PhDs than any other company. When they tested, it was 2 years, a full basis, $1 million. I mean, it was thorough, disciplined, and to the point. Well, one thing we did was look at what other channels can we sell our products in. And there were about 62 channels that I assessed, and we picked 1 or 2 or 3 that we felt like, looking at the consumer, the channel, competition, and what the company expectations, we felt like we could be successful. But we were stuck with, do we know? We don't have any facts. We've never sold in this channel. And the channel doesn't need to carry our brands, much less the category. So we're going to have to figure out new ways to add value. We're going to have to approach this in a different manner. So with that said, what we embarked on was changing reference points of what success looked like. So for example, what I wanted to do was test in home improvement whether our products would sell. So the home improvement channel, they don't sell grocery products. They do, but they're industrial looking So the Windex you buy in a grocery store is the same Windex you buy at Home Depot. It just looks more industrial because do-it-yourselfers don't clean, they prep projects. So the company wouldn't change the packaging unless the customer bought it. The customer wouldn't buy it unless the company changed the packaging. So I was like, kill me now. But I worked with a third party and we came up with an innovative idea. It was to do to a gondola or a 4-foot shelf, put the product on there and then call out the different usage occasions actually on the structure or the display itself. And there were no supply chains. So I actually had to have brokers hand carry product in and count what product wasn't there. We did exit interviews. That's not a formal, a consumer study or anything like that. It was really on the go. And I only did it in 4 stores, 1 Lowe's, 1 Home Depot, True Value, and Ace Hardware. And that was it. So in less than 3 months, with 1/10 of the cost of other test and learn models, we were able to put out there in a unique way our products with the different usage occasions to see the consumer response. I had to get alignment internally. And the biggest challenge was, what if we don't launch? What if we don't go to market with a new product? And I said, that's not the metric. The metric is how inexpensively and quickly can we determine whether we go. Not if we go, whether we go. And that everybody signed off. Okay, well then it's not my failure. So redefining what success looked like helped change that frame of mind. The other thing we found out were consumer insights that changed the game. One was in that exit interview from a broker that wasn't necessarily, a full focus group. When asked, why did you buy Febreze? The consumer said, because I expected to find it here, which meant it wasn't a grocery product yet. That one comment led Lowe's to buy it in its current packaging, and it became the number 1 SKU. Wow. So they kind of broke their own rule. The other insight was Bounty was flying off the shelf. We thought Comet, Spick and Span, these other, Bounty was going, it was crazy. So that led to the very first ever company channel specific SKU. Before that time, they didn't customize packaging or SKUs to other customers. So basically what they did was instead of a 4-pack of rinse and reuse, it was a 3-pack called Bounty Heavy Duty, and they called out the different usage occasions on the packaging. Then the issue was, oh my gosh, what if Walmart finds out? Or I said, sell it to them in home improvement. Don't put it over in grocery and start footballing the price. Put it in home improvement. And it was like, oh, okay. So, that was, and here's the thing. I still didn't get traction until I had a picture and we actually built it. And we would walk the executives in front of the actual structure and display, and they would go, oh. And that then became the company's new test and learn model, as well as helped us enter the home improvement channel. The story doesn't have necessarily a happy ending. They were like, this is awesome. Build a team. I built the team. Then they backed into what my goal would be. It was the first team that the company created without having the volume first. So like as Walmart grew, they would add a head count. And as it got bigger, they'd add and add. This was, we're going to invest in a team, and we got 0. So they backed in. They said, your first year, it's $100 million.
Because they give you the team. They want you to have the revenue, the units to match the team from get-go.
Correct. And not necessarily bad logic, bad understanding of a startup. So the first year, I had a terrible performance review. I failed. I delivered $20 million. It's now a $500 million business.
Wow.
So yeah, I love to tell that story because, I'll fail like that anytime. Yeah. But it was painful at the time. But, again, it opened the company's eyes to there are different ways to do things, and having 100% of the data, 100% of the time, sometimes just putting a stake in the ground and learning from it can leapfrog you.
Wow, that's definitely a great perspective on failure and a way to show that you've driven so many results across companies. You talked to us so far about leading change, leading people, driving results. And now we'd like to hear a little bit about business acumen and what you can share, how you developed it.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples about that is really my time at Hershey. One of the most important things is if you want to change behavior and change results is change what you're measuring. What gets measured, gets managed, gets done. And at Hershey, one of the ways they really built the sales organization in particular's business acumen was they changed the performance metric. Instead of, hey, won't you hit these gross sales, but don't overspend your customer investment? It was, we're going to pay you on net sales. You figure it out. And let me tell you, these sales folks got incredibly good at how to grow economically and efficiently because it wasn't just gross sales. It was net. So they had to actually subtract out the investment. So if I'm going to invest, I have to get the lift versus I'm going to invest to do what the customer wants and hope that I know I'll get the gross sales. Hopefully we'll get a profit. So in the past, if you got the gross sales, but slightly overspent, it was kind of okay because the real metric for sales was gross and finance and everybody else had to worry about profit.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. So now you're saying, hey, you're going to hit, let's say 100 million in gross revenue. You've got $1 per case to spend. If you could spend 50 cents, then your net sales are going to go twice as fast as your gross and the company's going to win versus just hit that top line. It doesn't matter what it costs. You've got to manage your cost as well. So it completely changed the mentality of the organization, having the right metric of net sales because it drove an investment mentality versus a top line only mentality.
Right. Because I'm looking at ROI or return some other way. I got it.
Exactly. Again, it was more of a do this, but don't do that. And that is not as bad as if you miss this. It was a very interesting dynamic. But Hershey made the gutsy call to change the metric. So that's one. So you had people that were really measuring the lift and the return on every dollar. That's step one. Yep. The other is candy is a pretty complex category in that it has 3 different business models. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but the front end is immediate consumption. It's usually negotiated every 2 or 3 years, and you pay per linear foot. So if you want this amount of space, it costs this amount of dollars. And if you're on the second shelf versus the third shelf, it's a 10% bump. It's just a very, again, different model than down the aisle, which is take home and selling bulk candy at the right price and promoting it every once in a while. Layer on top of that, the complexity of an additional 200 to 300 SKUs or seasonal business that you want to sell a lot of, but not too much, because if you have too much left over, it impacts the next year's purchase.
Yes.
So we would go in and sell all 3 separate things very transactionally versus what we called insights-driven performance, which is think of it as category and retailer annual planning. So what we would go in and do differently is say, what do you want the candy category to be? What is the purpose? What is the role of candy in a Target? What is the role of candy in a drugstore? Because it's very different. Mm-hmm. And how do then those 3 segments or business models play into that? So the queuing line at a drugstore is the end all be all. You better be on the front end. And seasons. Down the aisle, grocery down the aisle is a bigger player. So by doing it that way, we elevated the conversation to be much more strategic at the customer level. That completely changed the dialogue from, hey, put more of my products in versus Mars or Ghirardelli or whoever, to how is Hershey going to help you achieve your candy objectives and deliver that category's role to the overall company contribution. And then understanding the metric of, having the highest return on investment focus, it completely changed the approach to not only the customer, but delivering results with the company. So in my particular business, we were able to grow profit faster than net, faster than gross, while growing share, which is, the financial trifecta that sales teams typically never do, because they just want to hit that gross sales number no matter what it costs.
Fascinating. I mean, this is something that's come up for a lot for us. It sounds for me like you were part of creating this transformation of being much more customer-centric as opposed to transactional. And a lot of companies struggle with this. And I'm wondering, what are your go-to levers in order to create such a transformation?
That's a great question. First, I think it's fully defining customer. And while the customer is very different than stakeholders. So I like to when I think strategically and think about that, I think of the 5 C's. And it has to start in the very center with the consumer. Because if nobody's buying your products, you don't exist. And it doesn't matter if you're customer centric. So it has to start with doing the right thing for the consumer. Oh, by the way, then the customer can't argue it because it's going to benefit them in the category. Then I look at the category itself, competition, and then what does our company want? So I call it the 5 C's. How do you shift the company to become more customer-centric? Because some companies think customer-centric means doing whatever the customer wants. That is not what I'm talking about when I talk about customer or retailer-centric. I think you must be laser-focused, first things first with consumer, period. If you don't have your eye on, if you're just making a product because you can make it or because competition did, it is not going to last very long at all in the market, if any. So let's pretend that we check that we have a solid, differentiated brand and equity for the consumer. Then it's about your partner who delivers it to that consumer and shopper. If you're not focused on helping them be successful, then your mechanism, your tool, your venue to get to your consumer doesn't happen, isn't there. So how do we add value? And translating that internally, I think, is critical, especially if different functions have different metrics. So a constant conversation that comes up is SKU rationalization. Product supply, logistics is always trying to reduce the SKUs because of, the long tail. And sales is always trying to increase SKUs because they're just trying to sell more. And I think that is where we have to say, okay, again, here's a great example where you have to do the consumer, then the customer. Decaf coffee, always going to be small, never going to make a lot of money. But you got to have decaf coffee if you want to be a coffee brand with the consumer. And you want to be the brand for the customer so that you're the premier or chosen brand at the customer. Mm-hmm. So, there's a balance in understanding if product supply logistics, if finance puts the consumer and the customer, retailer, centric, all boats rise. We all do well. It's the balance between and the push and the pull that's the art versus the science. And a lot of sales organizations or some commercial will do, whatever they have to do, going back to the metric to hit whatever metric to get the bonus so that's why metrics are so important. That's also why I think the ideal metric for my industry is profitable, sustainable, shared growth. Profitable means the company wins, right? Sustainable means the company wins and there's not wasted work. Share growth means you're winning in whatever environment it is versus a particular growth percentage or anything like that. That means if there's a supply chain issue, if you're growing share, you're doing better than your competition. If it means that there's COVID or inflation or whatever, if you're still growing share and you're doing it profitably, that means that you're delivering a superior consumer value and experience, and you're becoming the expert solution and brand of choice for the customer or retailer. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you run a long-term, profitable, successful business if you aren't customer-centric based on consumer value.
We know that customer centricity and consumer centricity are so important, but at the same time, Kaihan and I through Outthinker talk to chief strategy officers and internal innovators, and we know that behind the scenes, it's all about influencing and building coalitions. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with that?
I think the most simple experience that led directly to breakthrough results was probably at Kellogg, and it was relaunching how we think about annual planning. And so, for example, at Kellogg's, the sales organization managed customer investment, marketing managed the advertising spend, and then there was a separate organization that managed promotional spend. Promotional spend would be things like Disney or Spider-Man, where you would have like a Spider-Man pack across multiple brands, Pop-Tarts and cereal and everybody managed their money separately. My department was charged with pulling that information together, disseminating it to the sales organization to build their customer plans. So again, very disjointed, and we would get okay results. I thought, why don't we build the optimal plan internally and then give it to sales? Because what was happening was you would have weeks or months that there was no activity, no customer investment, retailer investment, no advertising, and no promotions. And the other weeks, it was layered on top. It was wasted dollars, right? You didn't need it all. So we got together in a room and we put a jigsaw puzzle together in a map and said, what are we doing? What are you doing these weeks? What are we doing these weeks? And again, based on the consumer, where's consumption? And so we were able to spread and complement each of the investment and levers to drive commercial purchases and consumption versus not having anything or lots of layering because everybody was doing their own thing. First time in the company history, we grew share without overspending because we did the work on the front end together as a coalition. And we argued strategically, some brand or marketing would want, hey, we don't want you to spend trade investment there. And then we'd say, but there's volume that's needed. Versus having hundreds of people in the field do it individually, the leaders did it together and crafted the ideal plan that then could be customized by the customer. So we got ourselves in line, we integrated, we put out what we considered the perfect plan versus everybody doing their own thing. Did it take a little bit longer? Yeah. The second time, third time? No. The first time, yeah, because everybody wanted to do their own thing. But then we figured out better ways to integrate and optimize.
Any final takeaway that you have for us, and how can people continue to follow you and connect with you if you're open to that?
One, thank you for the privilege and the honor to share some of these stories. And I think that if some of this learning stories can help other people be more successful, then some of the blood, sweat, and tears that were experienced are worth it. And so I hope that in some way, somehow, that I add value to all of your listeners and to you as an organization.
Without a doubt.
So thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. I think the last words I would leave is I try to always think about 5 things when I either enter a new organization or as we develop a strategy for an organization, even year over year. And the first one is you have to begin with the end in mind. And that has to start with why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Where do we want to go? What is that end state? Because if you're not clear on that end state and you can't align others on that end state, then you're sunk from the beginning. I think the second one really is around prioritizing first things first. And that's why I have ad nauseum, I know you're probably sick of hearing it, talk about the consumer. And then you talk about, the customer. It's why companies exist. It's why we produce the products. Yes, we want to make money too, also. But if we're not doing right by the consumer and the retailer, then we're failing. The third one really is about run to the problems. Today's problems are really tomorrow's solutions. If you can figure them out, then you're going to come with a unique competitive advantage. The fourth one would really be about always carrying a spare. It will go wrong. You know, what are your contingency plans? How do you have 6 ideas in your back pocket?
Love that.
You know, so always carry a spare. And then the last one really is people are people, and we can't forget that. We have to assume positive intent and seek to understand so we avoid landmines. It's not about you. It's not about me. If you give the other person the benefit of the doubt and you seek to understand, 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up in a better situation. I don't think there are a lot of absolute truths. I think we all look at things from our own lens. And I think that we argue over that a lot. But if somebody's standing in a house looking out, they're going to describe, you know, grass and trees. If somebody's outside the house looking in, they're going to describe carpet and furniture. Who's wrong? No one. But we'll argue it till the end. And so I love the story about the blind men, the blind monks, and the elephant. You know, everybody was right and everybody was wrong in describing the elephant. Yeah. So how do we keep that in mind and not take things so territorial, personal, and know that there are 6 ways to get there, and yours may not be the best?
I love that. Wow. Thank you. Saves a piece of gold for us there. This has been phenomenal. I've got so many notes, and I saw Corey had also typing notes into our shared document here.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you so much for doing all of this and for thinking it through and not just keeping it in your head, but actually like structuring it into ways that we can learn from them and learn and apply your experience in building our businesses. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Strategy at Scale. Thank you to our producer, Oscar Perez, and our teams at Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm Kahan Krippendorf. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Strategy at Scale.